Your faces are so reassuring. So this morning we're going to hear a homily from both me and from Rev Lo. And for my part, I wanted to give you maybe a better explanation of why we're having online worship for the time being. I know church is a lifeline for many of us. And I believe, and I've believed for a long time, that our church saves lives. Coming to church for the first time back at my home congregation, I felt like that church saved my life. And so it's important for you to know that we would not make the decision to close this lifeline, our in-person gatherings, unless we thought it was necessary to save lives. And I know how hard it is to be apart. I miss all of you so much. And I can't wait to be able to see you in person again. I've been thinking this week about this phrase. I've heard it all my life, an abundance of caution. You hear this phrase when institutions or businesses are making some decision, usually to cover themselves, right? We made this decision out of an abundance of caution. Like the McDonald's is going to sanitize the whole indoor play place because there's been a norovirus outbreak. We're closing out of an abundance of caution. Or when the schools close after half an inch of snow, we're just doing this out of an abundance of caution. And I thought about this because I've heard this phrase over the past week used again. And this might be the first time in my life when the decisions we make are not merely out of an abundance of caution. Because over and over in my life, I've seen these abundance of caution moments turn out just fine, and everyone rolls their eyes and makes fun of their neighbors for having stocked up on rock salt and snow shovels for nothing. And this time, I need you to know that we're not just being abundantly cautious. We are acting because we have to. This is real. The practice time is over. I've heard people, especially on social media, ask, well, how's this different from the flu? We go through that every year and we get through it just fine. And the truth is that this virus is much more dangerous than the flu, especially for older people. And when we look around our sanctuary on Sundays at our beloveds, we know that it's a lot of older people that we care about. Now, health authorities from the CDC to the World Health Organization have all indicated that it now seems like a majority of people on the planet will eventually get this virus. It's going to make its way around. And so the question is not if, but when each of us will get it, and under what circumstances. And the answer to that question, the question of when we're going to get this, it appears to be determined by how much distance we put between one another. And if we carried on like normal, like nothing was happening and it was all fine, it would not be fine. The virus would spread quickly, our hospitals would be overwhelmed, and those of you who need care to be well might not be able to get it. So for me, my hope is that if you wind up needing hospital care, you'll be able to get it. Because those of us who could stay home and watch Netflix for 2 months did so. And not all of us can. I want us to give our hospitals time to care for the most vulnerable among us, little by little by little, as the days and weeks go by, so that we all have a better chance of seeing each other in person once again. Now, the irony is that for people like us who love connection, even if we're introverts, we hang on to seeing our beloveds every week. The irony is that one of the most loving things we can do is to stay away. And it doesn't feel good, does it? Feels weird. It's not in our human nature to stay away in times of trouble. We want to come together. We want to bring the flock in, of course. One of my colleagues told her church that she had to make the decision to cancel in-person services to protect them from themselves because she did not trust them not to hug. Oh, and that touched my heart in such a way. The Reverend Nadia Boltz-Weber said on Twitter this week that we're not just having a pandemic of sickness, we're having a pandemic of disappointment, a pandemic of the spirit. And I think that's real. When all of our concerts and our classes and our parties are all on hold indefinitely, when the humanities are taking a break, during a time when some of us are at our most scared and anxious, that's a lot of disappointment. It's a lot of sadness. And so if you are feeling it this week, like if you are going through it, I just want to honor that that is real. And if you're not feeling it yet, but you start to feel it next week, we are with you. I want to honor that your feelings are real. And we don't have to go on pretending that this is all normal. Life is not going to be normal for a little while, and it's okay to not feel okay about that. And so give yourself some extra kindness and understanding and loving care through these days. And I wanted to lift up also that for many of you, this situation has extra complications depending on your situation. So for people who work hourly jobs, especially in transportation, travel and entertainment, schools, childcare, grocery stores, many of you are seeing your hours cut or eliminated, and you're worried right now how you're going to make it. Others of you would like to stay home, but you can't work at home, and you're worried about that. Elders and immunocompromised people are worried too about surviving. And I wanted to say, I hear you. I hear you, and we are all holding you in loving care, even when we don't know what the best way forward is. You are not alone. I think if we could take the emotional temperature of the whole country, the mercury at this point has moved solidly into stress and anxiety for everyone. And I think that one of the antidotes to that is reaching out to one another. And so I ask you to reach out to your fellow church members. Call your friends from church. I know people don't like to call these days, especially millennials, but now might be the time to pick back up that antiquated technology of reaching out. If you're able-bodied and healthy, you could offer to go pick up groceries for your elderly neighbors or your immunocompromised church friends so that they don't have to go out. If you're a parent with kids, one thing you could do is pick one or two other families to have ongoing contact with and trade off babysitting so you get a break. The ways we connect now have to be a little cautious and smarter, but we still must connect in our time of worry and need. I wanted you to know that your church staff are pretty busy putting together things like neighborhood groups, support groups that we'd like to set up, moving all of our church meetings and classes onto Zoom, which is taking some time as we're all getting familiar with this platform, and getting programs for our children and youth online. And I want you to know that under normal circumstances, a massive rollout of programming like this would take months. So I would ask that you extend us all some grace and patience as we cram it all into like 3 days. And thank you to everyone else who works the church and all the volunteers. You know, everyone on earth, basically, is going to have to figure out new ways of doing our day-to-day stuff. Basically, everyone. And our focus, the focus of your church staff, is on helping sustain our religious community through this time. And it's not as if there will be no interruptions or changes, but we can still find ways of being together, of loving one another and staying connected. So we remember none of us is alone. I would urge you also, in closing, to think about all these closures and cancellations and disruptions, maybe in a different way. It's okay to be disappointed, but what if we thought about this not just as what we're losing or what we're missing out on or what we're having to give up? What if we thought about it as what we're choosing to do out of love, not out of an abundance of caution, out of an abundance of strength, resilience, love for one another, and generosity of spirit? Amen. Blessed be. I'll invite you now to join in singing our hymn, Simply Trust by Harmony Grisman.
Simply trust. Don't the leaves flutter down just like that? Simply trust. Don't the leaves flutter down just like that? Simply trust. Don't the leaves flutter down just like that? Simply trust. Don't the leaves flutter down just like that? Simply trust. Don't the leaves flutter down just like that?
So this morning, somebody forwarded me a paper by an epidemiologist, and I found that it used the exact same metaphor that I was using to open up my sermon with you all this morning. And Sarah said, well, that should be confirmation that you're on the right track. But what I wanted to start it with was this, there are two words that are Chinese characters. And when they are combined together, they create the word opportunity. And those words are danger and crisis. Danger and crisis offer opportunity. And this is what is before us now, danger and crisis. And we can choose to give in to anxiety or fear or panic, or we can choose to see the situation as an opportunity. And I'm very aware that it's a fine line that we're all treading between being proactive, acting preventatively and responsibly, and being alarmist in this current situation. So what's this opportunity that's being presented in the current pandemic? Well, I believe that there are many opportunities, some of which mean recovering old ways of being and living in the world. And there are new ways of living and being in the world that we will first have to imagine and then create. Because as Sarah hinted, there may never be a return to the status quo normal. But again, instead of focusing on what will be lost, it would be good for our souls if we could focus on what might be gained. If we could awaken our imagination and our creativity. And there's one thing that's certain amidst all of this, and it was articulated by one of the editors on the podcast, On Being with Krista Tippett. And that editor said that we must move through this, insisting on our connection to one another, even as we are called to keep to ourselves, to honor the ways we are interdependent. And so one of the opportunities that I see for us in this time, sorry, my printer printed out my pages totally wrong today, so you'll see me looking down and up trying to preach to you here. One of the opportunities we have now is to address fear and anxiety. And there's a Buddhist teacher named Sylvia Bornstein, and she states that anxiety is, quote, the free-floating hyperactivity of the mind that only wants to consider the worst possible outcome. Now, my mother harbored what I would now call a protective anxiety for her children. And for that protective anxiety, she earned the nickname from me of the prophetess of doom, which has come to bite me in the back because of so many of the things that she worried about, in fact, did happen. So when I was 18, I had the chance to go off to Turkey with a bunch of other United Church of Christ 18 to 21-year-olds to do some work and learn about Turkey and religion there. And my mom didn't want to sign the medical release form for me to go because she says, what if she has to have her appendix out over there? Well, the war broke out between the Turks and Greeks on the island of Cyprus. And in fact, I did have to have my appendix out over there. Another time, my mother said, you know, you're 20, you really should have a checkbook. And I was like, yeah. But a checkbook would have come in really handy when I was at the top of Cape Perpetua at sundown in a car I had borrowed from my sister with a flat tire, no cash, no check, no credit cards. So imagine my surprise when I found myself taking on the mantle of the prophetess of doom, Junior. Instead of imagining only the worst that can happen, what if we turn it around and ask ourselves, what's the worst that can happen? And take it from there, calmly. It shifts the prophetess of doom mentality to a reality that is actually freeing. There's another Buddhist teacher, Sharon Salzberg, and she distinguishes fear from anxiety by saying that fear is a response to an immediate threat to your safety, very, very, very present. She says your senses become alert and your muscles tense and they ready you to flee. Whereas anxiety manifests itself in the body in a similar way, even though the threat that generates it arises only in the mind. What if in this time of danger and crisis, we spend some time identifying for ourselves what is truly fear and what is anxiety? What if, when we started heading down the path of either one, we took 3 deep breaths? That we looked around the space that we're in and we brought ourselves back to the present, maybe simply by naming objects around us. Now, what I know is that fear can be instilled in ourselves and in others, and that we can become so whipped up is that we spread anxiety and fear to those whom we encounter with the power and the force of those summer wildfires that just rip through the Pacific Northwest. And one only has to go to the grocery store and see the empty shelves before you see this effect of panic and anxiety and fear. In the face of fear and anxiety, in this time, we find ourselves in the danger and crisis, and I would remind us to breathe, to ground, to look around and name our surroundings, that we may transform what appears as only danger, threat, and crisis into opportunity. The author, Rebecca Solnit, talks about what hope can mean in these times, and she writes, "Hope for me just means coming to terms with the fact that we don't know what will happen and that there's maybe room for us to intervene. Just because we don't know what will happen doesn't mean that any action we take is futile." Nice about putting the page over the camera. We cannot afford right now to be paralyzed by anxiety or fear that will result in inaction. So the question arises yet again, what is right action in these times? How should we be with one another? And I don't mean social distancing and washing hands, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, how should we be with one another in these times? How can we be a community? First of all, I think we need to go back to doing something very basic, and Sarah already mentioned this, like talking with one another in real time. Folks with children are going to find that all the running around they did to this event and this lesson and that sport and this music lesson and, all of which have been canceled, leaves something that is even in greater shortage than toilet paper: time. Time to be together and to engage one another. What if families started cooking together? What about doing puzzles at night, or going on walks or bike rides? Yes, keeping that 6 to 13 feet distance from anybody else you might encounter. What if you gathered in the readings, not around the television set, nothing wrong with that though, but if you gathered to read, maybe everybody sitting in their own little spot, of maybe a fire going, maybe music, maybe just simply quiet and reading. Or what if you gathered to read aloud to one another? What if, in addition to the ways that we now communicate with one another through social media and email, we actually called one another on the phone? What if we hand wrote letters to friends and family near and far? Or if we made our own cards to send perhaps to someone in the congregation who is alone or shut in? And that term, shut in, is no longer a term that's defined by age. What a novelty these days, a real live piece of snail mail that isn't a bill or solicitation. What if you started a phone tree on your street or your trailer park, or on your floor in your apartment complex? Or if you're single, that you found 4 other single people and that you made sure to call each other every morning so that someone was tracking you, someone knew that you were alive, or that if you weren't answering, that perhaps you needed help. Kind of like all those 12-step calls that are made in the early mornings and the evenings, except for the fact that what we're recovering from is social isolation and loneliness. So what if you and your friends did inventories of the food that you have, and what are you willing to share? Can you trade something you own or have for something else? Again, as Sarah mentioned, can you offer to shop for somebody who can't go out in public, perhaps because they're immunocompromised or they're ill? Are there chores we can do for one another, or just our neighbors? What can we offer one another in these times? And I urge you to be creative as you think about that. And to try the barter system, where you trade goods for services rather than exchanging money. This time of social distancing is really an incredible opportunity to find ways to maintain community, to find new ways of connecting, and to insist that the UUC community is still the church, even when we don't gather in a physical place on Sunday mornings. Because technology allows us so many ways to interact. And I would challenge you to find ways to make that technology work for you so that you may connect. So what if the poetry groups started publishing their poems online? And what if the birders started publishing the photos that I get on the little email list, and maybe even hinted at where a person could go if they wanted to bird in this area? Or what if you shared something that you came across in the day that was inspirational or helpful to you as you make your way through the day in these particular times? What if you baked or cooked something to leave anonymously on somebody's doorstep? What if you left them a piece of homemade art? And what if, instead of these horrible sermons that are called sermon in a box, where the congregation writes down questions for the minister who has to answer them on the fly from the pulpit, that instead you all submitted questions, theological, cosmological, angst-ridden, about life, anything you want to have sort of a public discussion about or a response to, and you submitted those to Sarah or to Katie and to myself, and I just warned them about this morning. And it's not so much that we're going to give you answers, is I think we're going to give you perspectives and open the conversation. I'm also aware through our treasurer, Katie Colburn, that we are facing blood shortages in this country. And if you are able to go down to Bloodworks and donate blood, it would be kind of cool to see how many of us from the church could actually go down there and donate. And here's something that may not come easily to you, but I think it's really important for us to develop this capacity in these times. What if we decided that there are 2 times during the day, let's say 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., that for 5 minutes we agreed, nobody has to know who the person is we're focusing on, but we agreed to sit with, stand with a person in your mind, in your heart, to lift up the intention of protection and health and well-being for 5 minutes. And what if in these times of all these facts that are cascading us and they're changing every day, we chose to trust our intuition? If you have a feeling that someone's in trouble, call them. Rather be safe than to have missed an opportunity. And so one of the things that I love about my house is that my dining table sits right here next to a 8-foot window that looks out on my neighbor's beautiful front yard and beyond. And their bird feeders host all kinds of birds depending on the season. And overhead, there are often geese that are flying by because of the proximity to the river. I can often hear either the osprey or the eagles crying. And I'm mesmerized by, at this time of year, the unfurling of bushes and shrubs and trees and flowers. And aren't we all supposed to spend 15 minutes a day outside, getting our vitamin D? What if we could just sit outside 15 minutes a day to simply observe the sounds and the visuals of our surroundings? If we cannot go outside, can we park ourselves by a window for 15 minutes to see what lies beyond? And what if in this time we paid attention to the daily rituals of our lives and fully inhabited them? Instead of running around in the morning to try to get your coffee ready and shove it in a thermos and get going, what if we took time making the coffee, smelling it, sitting with it, savoring it sip by sip? And for those of you like me who really don't drink coffee, feel free to substitute tea here. What if the preparation of and the consumption of our food became a sacred act? And what if doing dishes or bathing or doing and folding laundry became opportunities for practicing being fully present in each moment? What if we took this time to create rituals of connection with those we may live with or friends and family elsewhere? What if we finally, after years and years of good intentions, started journaling every morning for 5 to 15 minutes? What if we explored the craft or hobby we never seemed to have had time for in the busyness of our days? What if we created gratitude bowls or baskets and put our daily gratitudes on slips of paper that fill the bowl? Some people have like angel cards or other cards that have a single word on them in little bowls in their office, and people are invited to pick one. You can visit yours and pick it again, put it back, keep writing them, pick up new ones. What if in this time we took the opportunity to begin to know ourselves again, to remember who we are? There's a reading from the hymnal by the Reverend Wayne Arneson, who's now retired. And Sarah kind of alluded to this earlier, but I've always loved this reading. It's often used as a benediction. And he writes, "Take courage, friends. The way is often hard. The path is never clear. And the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down there is another truth. You are not alone. May it be so."